Leave her. They abandoned the sniper in the desert, then learned did Navy SEALs survive anything. Hook. Snow in the desert is something no one prepares for. Wind cuts skin like razors, temperature plunging below -10. Leave her. The order crackles through the radio, colder than the winter night itself. The woman lies behind a white ridge of sand, sniper rifle frozen solid, breath thin as morning mist. They believe she's dead, but they forget one thing. Navy SEALs don't learn how to win. They learn how to survive, at any cost. The briefing had been clean, too clean. Target confirmation at 0300. Extraction before dawn. Weather advisory, low visibility. Lieutenant Commander Brett Vaughn spoke like he was ordering breakfast. Behind him, satellite images showed the northern Syrian desert a maze of limestone ridges and dry wadis that had swallowed armies before. Harper Reeves stood at the back of the tent, M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle slung across her shoulder. She studied the topographic overlay while the others checked magazines and adjusted night vision mounts. Temperature's dropping, she said. Vaughn didn't look up. It's winter. That's what temperature does. It's dropping 12 degrees per hour. Moisture's moving in from the Mediterranean. Your concern is noted, petty officer. Translation: shut up and do your job. Harper had heard that translation before, during SEAL qualification training when instructors suggested she might be more comfortable in intelligence analysis. During her first deployment when the team leader kept her on overwatch instead of building entries. During the incident in Kandahar that nearly ended her career before it started. She'd proven herself 17 times since then. 17 confirmed kills, 3 successful solo extractions, 1 silver star she never mentioned. Still not enough. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen adjusted his plate carrier beside her. Weather models can be wrong. They can be. But wind patterns don't lie. Marcus had been the only one who voted for her inclusion on this team. She knew because she'd overheard Vaughn complaining to the commanding officer about having a diversity checkbox in his unit. The team moved out at midnight. 8 operators plus Harper, threading through a landscape that looked like bone under the moon. The desert here wasn't sand, it was calcified earth and shattered rock, ancient seabeds thrust up and baked for millennia. Harper took point on the ridgeline, 300 meters ahead and 200 meters elevated. Overwatch. Always overwatch. Her rifle scope painted the world in shades of green. She marked patrol routes, potential ambush points, the compound where their target supposedly slept. The wind began at 01:15, not a breeze, a presence. It came from the north like something alive and hungry, carrying a smell that didn't belong, wet and sharp and wrong. Harper keyed her radio. Wind shift, north-northwest, increasing. Copy, Vaughn responded. Meaning, I heard you, and I don't care. The clouds arrived at 01:45. They rolled across the stars like a closing fist. Harper had never seen weather move that fast. Within 10 minutes, the moon vanished. The temperature dropped 5 degrees. We need to abort, Harper transmitted. This pattern indicates overwatch, maintain position. Ground team proceeding to target. Through her scope, she watched the team advance on the compound. 7 shadows moving with lethal precision. They'd done this 100 times. Clear rooms, secure target, extract, simple. Except simple didn't account for nature having other plans. The first snowflake hit her cheek at 0200. In the Syrian desert, in November. Harper blinked at it, certain she'd imagined the sensation. Then another fell, and another. Within 60 seconds, the air filled with white. Desert snow is different. The flakes are small and hard, driven horizontal by wind that has nothing to slow it down. No trees, no buildings. Just thousands of miles of open space funneling directly into your position. Ground team, this is Overwatch. We have precipitation. Visibility dropping rapidly. Recommend immediate extract. Static answered her. She switched frequencies. Anyone copy? More static. The snow was already interfering with communications, or the storm was creating some kind of atmospheric distortion. Either way, she was blind and deaf to the team's status. Harper made a decision. She descended from her position. Harper Reeves had been 10 years old when she decided to become a SEAL. Not because she loved the ocean. Not because her father had been military, he'd been an accountant who died when she was 6. Not because of patriotism or glory or any of the reasons recruiters put in commercials. She decided because of a documentary about survival training. Specifically, about a section called drown-proofing, where candidates had their hands and feet bound and were thrown into a pool. Most people panicked. Some drowned, despite the safety divers. But a very few, found the stillness inside panic, found the way to relax into the binding, to control breath and buoyancy, to survive what their bodies insisted would kill them. Harper watched that segment 17 times. She understood something in that moment. Survival wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about being the calmest, when everything else was screaming. The Navy tried to talk her out of SEAL training. We have excellent opportunities in medical, administration, intelligence. She applied anyway. Bud S. tried to break her during Hell Week. 5.5 days, 4 hours of total sleep, constant cold water immersion, carrying logs and boats until muscles tore and bled. She rang out on day 4. Not because she quit, because an instructor medically disqualified her for excessive fatigue, creating safety concerns for her team. She appealed, fought through channels, waited 6 months, applied again. The second time, she made it. Barely. Always barely. Always being watched more carefully. Held to a different standard. Evaluated not just on performance, but on whether she fit the culture. That's why she'd noticed the weather. When you spend years having to be twice as competent to be considered half as good, you develop instincts. You see the things others miss because missing them might be the excuse they need to say you don't belong. Harper had seen the cloud patterns during the briefing, seen the moisture gradient, seen the temperature inversion that would trap cold air at ground level while warmer air sat overhead, the exact recipe for freak precipitation. She'd tried to warn them. Now she was moving downslope through increasingly heavy snow, rifle held at low ready, night vision almost useless as the flakes reflected and scattered the infrared light. The compound was 800 meters southeast. If the team had already breached, they'd be inside for another 10 to 15 minutes. Extraction bird would be inbound after that. If the bird could fly in this. Harper checked her wrist GPS. The weather was expanding rapidly, a cell already 30 kilometers across and growing. This wasn't a squall. This was a full winter storm, the kind that happened in this region maybe once a decade. And they'd walked right into it. She was 300 meters from the compound when the explosion lit up the snowfall. Not inside the compound, east of it, a massive orange bloom that sent shockwaves rippling through the storm. Harper dropped to prone, scope up, scanning. The compound was intact, but east, where the vehicle cache had been marked, now showed flames leaping 40 feet high, ammunition cooking off in chains of secondary explosions. Through a brief gap in the snow, she saw figures running, not her team. Local fighters, at least 20 of them, converging on the compound. This wasn't a surgical strike anymore. This was about to become a massacre. Harper moved without thought, not toward the compound that would accomplish nothing. Toward high ground northeast of the target, a limestone outcropping that overlooked the entire approach. Her legs burned. Altitude plus exertion plus cold was a trifecta designed to shut down muscle function. She ignored it the same way she'd ignored instructors telling her to quit, the same way she'd ignored every voice that said she wasn't built for this. The outcropping was a knife edge of rock, barely wide enough for a prone shooting position. Harper scraped over the top and immediately set her rifle. Through the scope, now almost useless with snow accumulation, she caught glimpses of the chaos below. The enemy fighters weren't military, militia, probably local territory defense. But there were a lot of them, and they'd been close enough to respond to the explosion within minutes. Her team was pinned inside the compound. She could see muzzle flashes through windows. Harper ranged the distance. 540 meters. Difficult shot on a calm day. Nearly impossible in driving snow with wind gusting from multiple directions. She took it anyway. The M110 bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw a fighter carrying an RPG simply crumple. She worked the trigger again. And again. Not rapid fire that was spray and pray. Measured. Breathing between shots. Reading wind by watching snow patterns. 3 fighters down before they realized they had a sniper problem. The radio crackled to life, taking heavy fire, requesting immediate. Static swallowed the rest. Harper keyed her mic. Ground team, Overwatch has your 6, providing suppression on your eastern approach. No response. She kept shooting. The snow was accumulating on her rifle, in her scope, on her hands. She had to brush it clear after every shot. The metal was so cold it burned. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked out of the storm toward her position. Harper rolled left as the explosion tore through the limestone where she'd been lying. Shrapnel and rock fragments shredded the air. Her ears rang. Couldn't hear, couldn't think. But she could move. She low-crawled 15 meters west to a secondary position. Set up again. Resumed fire. The enemy was adapting, using the storm and buildings for cover. Harper could only catch them in brief windows, but every shot counted. Every fighter she dropped was one fewer her team had to engage. The ground beneath her shifted, not an earthquake. The storm had brought precipitation, and this limestone was already riddled with erosion channels. Water was seeping into fractures, expanding, destabilizing. Harper felt the entire outcropping lurch. She tried to scramble backward, but the rock gave way like a trapdoor. 1 second she was prone on solid ground. The next, she was sliding down a steep slope of collapsing stone and snow, rifle torn from her grip, arms flailing for purchase. She hit the bottom of a dry wadi in an explosion of white powder. For several seconds, she couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't orient which direction was up. Then training kicked in. Stop thrashing. Inventory yourself. Fingers working, toes working, neck mobile, ribs painful but probably not broken. Weapon gone. Harper clawed through the snow until her hand found the rifle. The scope was shattered, the barrel packed with debris. Even if she could clean it, she'd have no way to zero the sights. She was 300 meters from the compound with no long-range capability and no radio contact. The smart move was to hide, wait for extraction, stay alive. Harper started moving toward the compound. Lieutenant Commander Brett Vaughn had made 53 tactical decisions in his career that he could defend. This wasn't going to be 54. Say again? He pressed his radio tight to his ear, trying to filter out the gunfire and wind. Collateral damage on ridgeline. No movement detected. Multiple hostiles converging. The drone operator was breaking up. The storm was playing hell with everything electronic. Brett looked at his team, pinned in 3 rooms of a compound that was never supposed to be contested. Their target had fled before they arrived. Intel failure. Now they were paying for it. Can you confirm Overwatch status? Thermal shows cold signature. No movement for 3 minutes. Sir, we need to extract now or you won't have air support. 3 minutes. Harper had been silent on comms for 3 minutes. The outcropping where she'd been positioned had partially collapsed. They'd watched it on drone feed before the snow obscured the camera. Cold signature meant dead or dying. Brett had served with 14 snipers. He understood what they did. Understood that Overwatch wasn't glory, it was isolation, patience, and taking shots that saved your team while exposing yourself. But he also understood time. They had a 90-second window to break contact and reach the extraction point. After that, the bird wouldn't be able to land in zero visibility conditions. Ground team, prepare for immediate exfil. Route Hotel, bounding Overwatch. Marcus Chen looked at him through the darkness. What about Harper? Drone shows no vitals. Shows cold signature. That's different than... Staff Sergeant, we have 90 seconds. Sir, we don't leave people. Brett felt something crack inside his chest. Marcus was right. They didn't leave people. That was the rule. The covenant. The thing that separated SEALs from every other fighting force on Earth. But rules assumed you had options. The building shook as another RPG hit. Dust and debris rained down. 60 seconds, the drone operator said in his ear. Brett looked at his team. 7 men depending on him to get them home. 7 families who would get folded flags if he made the wrong call. Versus 1 woman who had a cold thermal signature and hadn't responded in 4 minutes. Math that should have been simple. Math that felt like swallowing glass. Ground team, move now. Route Hotel. They moved. Combat reloads while backing toward the rear wall. Explosive breach on the back door. Then they were in the storm, running through snow that already covered their boot prints. Visibility down to 20 meters. Marcus grabbed Brett's shoulder. We can't. Overwatch is down. We stay. We all die. You don't know she's... Staff Sergeant, move. They ran. The extraction point was 400 meters north. The Black Hawk was already inbound, pilot muttering prayers that he'd be able to land and take off again. Brett kept waiting for Harper's voice on the radio. Some miracle. Some sign. Only static answered. The helicopter appeared through the white like a ghost, rotors whipping snow into a blinding vortex. The team piled in, pulling each other aboard. Go! Brett shouted. The pilot didn't need to be told twice. The bird lifted, tilted, and vanished into the storm. In his ear, one final transmission from the drone before it lost signal. Multiple heat signatures converging on compound. Ground team clear. No additional friendlies detected. Brett pulled off his helmet and stared at the floor. Marcus sat across from him, jaw tight, saying nothing. Because what could you say? They'd just done what SEALs never do. They'd left someone behind. Harper woke to silence. Not the silence of peace, the silence of sound-dampening snow so thick it absorbed everything. She was buried, not completely, but enough that extracting herself took 30 seconds of careful movement. Panic was the enemy. Panic made you thrash and exhaust oxygen and energy. She emerged from the drift like a resurrection. The wadi was transformed. What had been rocky ground was now a landscape of smooth white curves. The storm had intensified, wind creating drifts 6 feet high in places, bare stone in others. Harper took inventory. Body, bruised, possibly one cracked rib, minor cuts, functional. Weapon, rifle jammed with debris, scope destroyed. She had her sidearm a SIG P-226 with 3 magazines. Comms, radio damaged in the fall. Screen cracked, no power. Navigation, wrist GPS intact. She was 2.3 kilometers from the original extraction point. Current time 0347. Temperature, -12, Celsius and dropping. She'd trained for this. Not in Syria, in Alaska. Winter warfare school. Week-long exercises where they'd been dropped in sub-zero conditions with minimal gear and told to survive and complete objectives. The instructors had been clear. Cold kills faster than bullets. Harper assessed her clothing. Multicam fatigues, not rated for this temperature. Plate carrier, which provided some core insulation. No cold weather gear, because who plans for snow in the Syrian desert? She had maybe 4 hours before hypothermia became critical, less if she stayed inactive. First, shelter. Harper moved along the wadi until she found a spot where the rock face overhung. She used her knife to dig into a drift, creating a small cave. Not deep, just enough to block wind and trap body heat. She lined it with her emergency blanket, a thin sheet of mylar that every operator carried. Effectively useless in any kind of wind, but in an enclosed space, it would reflect up to 90% of radiated heat. Second, assess escape routes. The GPS showed her position relative to friendly territory. She was 70 kilometers from the nearest coalition base, 40 kilometers from the closest village that might have communications. 70 kilometers in a winter storm with no cold weather gear. That was a death sentence. But SEALs didn't receive death sentences. They just received problems to solve. Third, weapons check. Harper field stripped her rifle by feel in the darkness of her snow cave. The bolt carrier was intact, but the barrel was definitely damaged. She could feel the deformation from the fall. Firing it might work once, or it might explode in her face. She set it aside and focused on the pistol. Racked the slide several times to ensure proper function. 17 rounds in the current magazine, 34 more in reserve. 51 bullets between her and whatever came next. Fourth, stay awake. Falling asleep meant not waking up. Harper knew the biology. Hypothermia created drowsiness that felt peaceful. Your body's way of shutting down systems to preserve core temperature. Most people died in their sleep, never knowing they were dying. She couldn't allow sleep. Instead, she began exercises. Tensing and releasing muscle groups. Enough to generate heat, not enough to burn energy she couldn't replace. The storm howled outside. The temperature continued dropping. Harper thought about her team. They'd extracted, she was certain of that. Vaughn wouldn't risk the unit for one operator, especially one he'd never wanted. She didn't blame him. That's what training did. It took emotion out of the equation and replaced it with math. Sometimes the math said leave people behind. But math didn't account for one variable. Harper wasn't dead yet, and as long as she was breathing, she was still in the fight. She checked her watch. 4:15. Dawn in 2 hours. She just had to survive until then. Then she'd figure out what came next. The fighters came at 0500. Harper heard them before she saw them, voices carried on the wind. Someone laughing, probably at the absurdity of tracking anyone in these conditions. She remained perfectly still in her snow cave, hand on her pistol. Through the narrow opening, she watched shapes materialize. 3 men, maybe 4. They were moving without urgency, weapons slung. Looking for bodies, she realized. Not survivors. They thought everyone was dead, frozen or buried or both. One of them walked within 10 meters of her position, close enough that she could see his breath, the ice forming on his beard, the AK-47 hanging from a patrol sling. He paused, looking at something in the snow. Her rifle. She'd left it partially buried 50 meters from her shelter. The fighter called out to his companions. 2 more materialized from the white. They gathered around the weapon, examining it. Discussion in Arabic. Harper understood enough to catch the gist. American, military, no body nearby. One of them scanned the wadi. His eyes passed over her hiding spot without recognition. They continued south, presumably searching for more equipment or bodies. Harper waited until they disappeared, then waited 10 more minutes. Then she moved. Not away from them, after them. The fighters had left tracks even the snow couldn't completely obscure. Deep boot prints, multiple sets. They were heading toward the compound, probably to salvage whatever the Americans had left behind. Harper followed at a distance, pistol drawn, moving from cover to cover. The storm provided concealment, but it also meant she might walk into them without warning. They'd stopped at the collapsed outcropping. Harper crouched behind a boulder 60 meters away, watching. One of the fighters was pointing at the rockfall, explaining something. The others nodded. They thought she'd been buried there, probably assumed her body was under tons of stone. Good. Let them think that. But then one of them pulled out a radio, speaking quickly, and Harper caught one word clearly: American. They were reporting to someone, which meant more fighters might be coming, or worse, media, propaganda, photos of a dead American SEAL for recruitment videos. Harper made a calculation. 3 fighters, 51 rounds, 60 meters and low visibility. Not good odds for pistol work, but she'd made worse shots during qualifications. She waited for the right moment, when they were clustered, when the wind gusted hard enough to cover sound. She didn't shoot. Instead, she circled wide, using the terrain and storm to close distance. Got within 30 meters, 20, 15. The fighter with the radio was still talking. Back turned. Harper's knife made no sound. The man dropped without a word, radio falling from his hand. She caught it before it hit the ground. The other 2 turned at the movement, saw their companion down, and Harper shot them both center mass before they could raise weapons. 2 shots, 2 down. The suppressed pistol was quiet, but not silent. In the storm, it sounded like someone knocking on a distant door. Harper collected weapons, ammunition, the radio. One of the fighters had a cold weather jacket. She took it without hesitation. Survival had no room for sentiment. She keyed the radio, listening to traffic. Multiple units were spread across the area, searching. They knew Americans had been here. They wanted proof. Harper switched off the radio and removed the battery. Then she began moving north, away from the compound, away from the search parties, toward the 70 kilometers that separated her from safety. The storm was still building. Wind speed had to be 50 kilometers per hour, maybe more. The snow was now mid-calf, deep in drifts. But Harper had food energy bars from the dead fighters. She had water she could eat snow. She had a weapon and ammunition. Most importantly, she had a goal. Navy SEALs don't learn how to win. They learn how to survive. And Harper Reeves was just getting started. The debrief was in a reinforced tent at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, 200 kilometers from where they'd left Harper to die. Lieutenant Commander Brett Vaughn stood at attention, watching a colonel he'd never met review after-action reports, with the kind of silence that promised nothing good. "Walk me through the decision," the colonel said finally. Brett did, calmly. Clinically, time constraints, 0 visibility, cold thermal signature, no radio response for 6 minutes. Drone operator confirming multiple hostiles converging. Math. The colonel nodded. And the body? Petty Officer Reeves. Where's the body? Brett felt his stomach drop. Sir, extraction wasn't possible. Conditions. So you left an American operator in enemy territory during a winter storm without confirmation of death. Sir, the thermal signature. Shows cold, not dead, cold. Do you understand the difference, Lieutenant Commander? Brett said nothing. The colonel stood. We have Predator assets over the area now. Storm's clearing. You know what they found? He turned a laptop around. Drone footage. Thermal imaging. 3 bodies. Adult males. Estimated time of death. 90 minutes ago. These men were part of the local militia. They were found near the outcropping where you assessed Petty Officer Reeves as Kia. 2 of them were shot. 1 had his throat cut. Brett stared at the screen. Now, the colonel continued, I'm not a SEAL. I'm just a simple infantry officer. But in my experience, corpses don't shoot people. Marcus Chen, standing beside Brett, spoke up. Sir, permission to speak. Granted. I want to go back. Negative. We're not risking another team in those conditions. Then risk me. Alone. I can. Staff Sergeant. I said negative. The colonel turned back to Brett. Here's what we know. Reeves is alive. She's armed. She's currently operating behind enemy lines with no support, no communications, and no extraction plan. The entire region is now alert to American presence. which means every militia group within 100 kilometers is looking for her. He let that sink in. We have a narrow window, storms clearing, which means air support, but it also means the enemy has better visibility. If we're going to recover her, it needs to be now. Sir, I'll lead the team, Brett said. No, you'll stay here. Captain Morrison will handle the rescue operation. Sir, respectfully. Lieutenant Commander, you made a call in the field. I'm making one now. You're grounded pending investigation. Dismissed. Brett felt the words like a punch, but he held his salute until the colonel returned it. Outside the tent, Marcus grabbed his arm. This is on me. I should have. You should have what? Stayed behind with her? Then we'd have 2 people to recover. We don't leave people, Brett. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you made the easiest call instead of the right one. Brett turned on him. Easy? You think that was easy? I think you'd already decided she was dead before you checked. I think maybe part of you wanted an excuse to... Brett's fist moved before his brain caught up. Marcus blocked it easily, shoved him backward. Hit me if it makes you feel better, Marcus said. Won't change what happened. Brett's radio crackled. Command to all units. We have movement. Sector 7-9er. Single individual. Moving north. Heat signature consistent with... The transmission cut off. Brett and Marcus looked at each other. Then they were running toward the operations center. The screen showed drone footage. A figure moving through snow. White jacket over military fatigues. Carrying weapons. The thermal imaging showed body temperature slightly elevated from movement. Heart rate visible in the infrared. Alive. Definitely alive. How far? Brett demanded. The drone operator checked coordinates. 68 kilometers from our position. 43 kilometers from the nearest hostile settlement. Get me, Morrison. Now. Within 10 minutes, 2 Black Hawks were spinning up. Rescue team, medics, cold weather gear. The plan was simple. Fast rope insertion, grab her, get out. Brett watched from the operations center, helpless, grounded, unable to fix his mistake. On screen, Harper continued walking. Not running that would exhaust her. Not resting that would let hypothermia win. Just steady, disciplined movement north, toward friendly lines, toward survival. She's been moving for 6 hours straight, the drone operator said quietly, in negative 15-degree weather, with no cold weather gear. Brett watched her silhouette on the screen. Navy SEALs don't learn how to win, he thought. They learn how to survive, even when the people who should protect them decide they're not worth saving. Harper heard the helicopters before she saw them. Not enemy, the sound was wrong. Blackhawks, distinctive rotor signature, coming from the north. Coalition forces. Her first instinct was relief. Her second was caution. She was 60-plus kilometers from the extraction point, in hostile territory, carrying enemy weapons. She looked like exactly the kind of target a nervous door gunner might engage. Harper pulled out her last chemlight, a green glow stick from her survival kit. She cracked it and held it overhead, the universal signal for friendly forces. Then she waited. The first Black Hawk descended through clearing skies. Dawn had broken an hour ago, painting the snow gold and pink. The storm had passed, leaving a landscape transformed. The helicopter flared and operators fast roped down. 6 of them. Full kit, weapons up. Harper kept the chemlight raised with one hand, her other hand visible and empty. Harper Reeves? Someone shouted over the rotor wash. Confirmed. They swarmed her position. Not aggressive, protective. Someone draped a warming blanket over her shoulders. Another started a medical assessment. I'm fine, she said. Let us check anyway, petty officer. The medic ran through vitals. Mild hypothermia, dehydration, bruised ribs, minor lacerations. Nothing critical. You walked 68 kilometers, the team leader said. In a blizzard, with no gear. Harper looked at him. It was only 65 when I checked. Someone laughed. The tension broke. They loaded her into the helicopter. She refused the stretcher. I can walk, but accepted help climbing aboard. Her legs had started shaking once she stopped moving, adrenaline crash hitting hard. The Black Hawk lifted. Through the open door, Harper could see the landscape falling away, the compound where everything went wrong, the ridgeline where she'd nearly died, the wadi where she'd spent the coldest night of her life. Your team's going to be glad to see you, the medic said. Harper didn't respond, because she'd already done the math. She'd been abandoned for a reason. Vaughn had made a tactical decision. Leave 1, save 7. She didn't blame him, but she also didn't expect welcome home fanners and apologies. The flight took 23 minutes. When they landed, a crowd had gathered. Other operators, support staff, medical personnel. Harper stepped down from the helicopter on her own power and saw Marcus Chen pushing through the crowd. He stopped 3 feet away, looked at her like he'd seen a ghost. "You made it," he said. "SEALs survive," Harper replied. Then he pulled her into a hug that made her ribs scream. She didn't complain. Behind him, Brett Vaughn stood at the edge of the crowd. Their eyes met. He nodded once. Not an apology, not an explanation, just acknowledgement. Harper returned the nod. Some things didn't need words. The after-action review took place 6 hours later, after Harper had been medically cleared, debriefed by intelligence, and given clean fatigues. She sat in a conference room with the rescue team, her original team, and 3 officers she'd never met. Captain Morrison led the review. "Petty Officer Reeves, walk us through your actions from the point of separation." Harper did, clinically. The collapse, the shelter, the militia fighters, the walk north. "You eliminated 3 hostile combatants," Morrison said. "Correct, sir. With a pistol and a knife. And tactical advantage. They thought I was dead." One of the officers leaned forward. "You walked 68 kilometers in sub-zero conditions. That's outside the parameters of what we consider survivable." Harper met his eyes. "Sir, with respect, that's what we train for. Surviving outside parameters. Bud, S doesn't include winter warfare at that level." "No, sir, but Alaska training does. And survival, evasion, resistance, and escape school, and approximately 17,000 hours of personal study on cold weather survival because I knew someday I might need it." The room was silent. Morrison pulled up drone footage on a screen. "We tracked you for the last 3 hours of your movement. You maintained an average pace of 4.2 kilometers per hour. On flat terrain in good conditions, that's a walking pace. In deep snow, injured, with hypothermia setting in, that's remarkable. It's discipline, sir, not remarkable. It's both." Morrison turned to the room. "Reeves demonstrated every principle we try to teach. Situational awareness, resource acquisition, tactical patience, physical resilience, and something we don't teach but hope. Every operator develops the refusal to accept death as an option." He looked at Brett Vaughn. "Lieutenant Commander, you stated in your initial report that thermal imaging showed a cold signature, that you assessed Reeves as Kia." Brett stood. "That's correct, sir. And if you had that call to make again?" The room watched Brett. Harper watched Brett. He took a breath. "Sir, I would verify. I would send someone to confirm. Even if it cost us the extraction window, I would verify. Because we don't leave people. That's not a guideline. That's the foundation of everything we do." Morrison nodded slowly. "Lieutenant Commander, you made a tactical decision under extreme pressure with incomplete information. Your mistake wasn't the decision, it was accepting incomplete information as fact. Thermal imaging shows cold, not dead. No radio response might mean equipment failure, not casualty. You operated on assumptions when you should have operated on confirmation." "Yes, sir. That said, your team survived. The mission, while not successful, didn't result in total loss. You made a hard call. It was the wrong call, but I understand why you made it." Morrison turned to Harper. "Petty Officer Reeves, do you have anything to add?" Harper stood. "Sir, Lieutenant Commander Vaughn had 7 operators depending on him. He had a 90-second window. I had a cold thermal signature and no comms. His math was sound, but wrong. But wrong, because the math didn't account for what SEALs do when the math says we should die. Which is, we survive anyway." Morrison almost smiled. "Anything else?" Harper looked at Brett. "Sir, I request no action be taken against Lieutenant Commander Vaughn. He did what he thought was right. I'm alive because of my training, not despite his decision." Request noted. Dismissed. The room emptied. Brett waited for Harper by the door. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Do what?" "Cover for me." Harper looked at him. "I'm not covering. You made a call. It was wrong, but you made it for the right reasons. That's all any of us can do. Marcus said I'd already decided you were dead before I checked. Maybe you had. Doesn't change the fact that I'm not." Brett studied her. "You're different than I thought. Most people are, sir, once you give them a chance to show you." She walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway. The mission was classified as a tactical failure. No target secured, no intelligence gained, significant resources expended, 1 operator placed in extreme danger due to command decision. None of that appeared in official records. What did appear? 1 Navy SEAL survived 68 kilometers of hostile territory in extreme weather conditions. eliminated multiple threats, executed successful evasion and escape, returned to friendly forces with actionable intelligence on enemy positions and movements. The kind of outcome that becomes a case study at training schools. Harper didn't attend the ceremony where they gave her a Navy Commendation Medal. She was already deployed again, somewhere in Africa, doing the same job she'd always done. But something had changed. Marcus Chen told her about it during a satellite call. They're calling you something. What? Ice. Because you survived when you should have frozen, and because you stayed cold when everything else was burning. Harper smiled. That's stupid. That's your call sign now. Deal with it. Back at Sentinel, Brett Vaughn received a written reprimand in his file. Nothing career-ending. Just a note that said, verified failures before accepting them as fact. He framed it in his office. Because some lessons were worth remembering. On a ridge overlooking the Syrian desert, 3 bodies were eventually recovered by local forces. They were buried with honor appropriate to their faith. The Americans who'd been in the area were never officially acknowledged. But the locals told stories. About a woman in the storm, about footprints in snow that shouldn't exist, about someone who walked through death and came out the other side. The stories grew with each telling, as stories do. But the core remained true. Navy SEALs don't learn how to win. They learn how to survive, even when abandoned, even when frozen, even when the math says death is certain. Harper Reeves proved that truth in the White Desert. She proved it with every step through the snow. She proved it by refusing to accept the ending other people had written for her. Some footprints can't be erased, not by wind, not by snow, not by time. They remain as evidence that someone passed this way, someone who refused to die, someone who survived anyway.